discuss what some of the psychology says around manifestation. So what kind of stood out to you the most when it comes to kind of what you know about psychology and manifestation and some of the research?
Yeah, when I was thinking really about like manifestation and making things happen, what stood out to me initially was what we call the cognitive triangle. So it's a part of like cognitive behavioral therapy. And essentially it's, that if you draw a triangle out, there are 3 points to this triangle. And there are your thoughts, there are your feelings, there are your behaviors, and they all interact. So they're distinct things. Your thoughts are the things that, you think in your mind. Your feelings are your emotions, or maybe even physiological feelings, perhaps. And then your behaviors are your actions, the things that you do. All of those things are different, but they're very much interconnected. And so when I think about manifestation and saying, believing, and imagining it, I think it's really powerful because a lot of times it does affect how you feel, and it also affects what you do. So if you're thinking positively or thinking that I can do this, that this can happen, then it typically produces some sort of emotion that is maybe motivating or optimizing or hopeful. And it's the type of emotion that might lead you to an action that might have a consequence. And the consequence would probably be that it would be more than likely or would give you a better chance that that thing actually happens. So that's kind of how the triangle works. Like, what do you think? How does that affect how you feel? And how does that ultimately affect what you do? And I do think a lot of manifestation has to do with believing something, thinking something can happen, and feeling whatever feelings you have that are really important, especially in trying times when it's not happening right away, or when you're trying to do something that's very difficult, when something is new or you're learning a new skill. If you believe that and you're able to also have thoughts that overpower maybe how difficult it is, how disappointing it might be for something not to happen, those thoughts, those belief thoughts can help counteract maybe the disappointment that you feel. And then ultimately help you to continue to engage in behaviors that might give you a better chance of making that thing happen. Behaviors like telling people what your desires are, asking for help, maybe taking a class, moving to Los Angeles or Hollywood, taking an acting class, continuing to sing and rate yourself and go to singing classes. Whatever it is, it helps you do something. And that it's in that action and that doing that I think definitely gives you a better chance of making whatever that goal or dream happen.
Yeah, definitely. I know you have more real fast with the cognitive triangle. Yeah, it's huge. I'll do a lot of CBT work. I pick and choose some elements from CBT. But most importantly, that cognitive triangle, right?
Yeah.
And it's really the premise of if you can change your thoughts, you can change your world pretty much. And some people think, cliche, but literally according to this theory and according to just what we've seen in some of our work that we do, literally if you can change some of your thoughts, you'll change your world, right? You'll change some of your feelings and behaviors. And even if you think about, I know you gave the example of the acting and singing, even thinking about things that very much we all can relate to, thinking about the relationships that we engage in, some of the interactions that we all have these different thoughts. And a lot of this stems from this core belief that we have, right? Unfortunately, most of us have this negative core belief. And a lot of us have this core belief, in essence, that tells us that we're not enough, right? So let's go with that. So then you have this thought of I'm not enough, I'm not lovable, right? Well, can you imagine if you're having this constant thought, now how is that impacting your feelings, right? Well, now I feel bad about myself. I don't feel confident. My self-esteem is low. I'm just not lovable, right? All these negative feelings. Now, can you imagine how that starts to impact your behaviors, how you're showing up in your relationships, or maybe not showing up in your relationships? Who you're choosing to engage in relationships with. More times than not, it's going to be someone or some group of people that are going to reinforce that negative thoughts that you have of you're not enough, you're not lovable, right? So then it kind of fulfills that for you of okay, yeah, I knew this was a true thought, right? So even if that relates and resonates with some of you of what that cognitive triangle can look like on your day-to-day life, right? It impacts everything that we do, right? So that's very important. So I like that first piece you shared.
I do too, and I like that you kind of gave the opposite end of like, if you, just the idea of core beliefs I think is really important and they definitely impact that whole triangle. And it's important for you to consider that when your core beliefs, or just any beliefs that you might have, when they are negative, how they act on that triangle, and that it might be leading you towards or to engage in behaviors that fulfill that core belief, that are consistent with that core belief, but that are ultimately incongruent with what you want for yourself, or manifesting that dream.
Yeah, definitely.
And it makes me think about like the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy, like from Psychology 101, the idea that ultimately what, research has shown is that what you believe actually kind of fulfills, like it actually happens. So you might believe something and it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's prophetic. It's self-fulfilling, meaning it ends up happening. And I think it lends itself to the idea of manifestation, because ultimately what you believe, and if you think about that cognitive triangle, if it can lead to you engaging in behaviors and having feelings that ultimately lead to what you want, but also can lead to what you don't want.
Yeah, definitely. So in a sense, it taps into this, the psychological element that we're always looking for evidence to back up some thoughts that we have, or back up some of these beliefs, right? And so with that self-fulfilling prophecy, right, and this is sometimes unconscious, right? But in the back of our minds, we're looking for things that shows us evidence of like, why I'm not worthy, why I can't achieve this goal, right? But when you start having that positive like thought association with it, now we're looking for some evidence of like why I can actually maybe do this, right? Why this actually might be true. So yeah, no, that's an important piece for sure. I do have a quote I like the neuroscientist type work. But so is an interview with Matthew Walker. He's a neuroscientist, and he kind of talks about the act of like physical visualization. And some of you may be familiar with like imagery, right? With like athletes, they'll have them use a lot of like imagery, like imagine yourself performing really well in this game, right? And there's been a lot of research to show that has some benefits. So in a sense, he's talking about that physical visualization. But he says that the physical visualization is about 50% as effective as physically performing it too, right? So it's not just about physically doing something, but actually visualizing yourself doing it. But it's also 50% effective in changing the plastic connections within the brain, which really just shows that we literally and actually can rewire our brain in a beneficial way, right? And that's just through visualizing ourselves doing these things that maybe we want to do, right? So sometimes we think like, oh, okay, well, once I'm actually doing it, then I'll be able to like visualize myself in that scene. But there's power, right? 50% more effectiveness in actually visualizing yourself doing these things. But that rewiring your brain is huge. It's definitely possible, but it's huge, and kind of takes that like discipline and consistency, right? Our brains are amazing things. Unfortunately, they can't rewire themselves within like 2 days or a week, right? Like it's going to take some consistency with that.
I love that. It reminds me kind of like of exposure, like the power of exposure. And I think like doing or seeing something in a way like sensitizes our brain to be able to like be familiar with it, perhaps in the future, and to kind of have comfort with doing that thing. Yeah. So I really do like that the science bears out the idea of visualization. And as you were talking, it was making me think about this concept called possible selves. And it's generally just people's images or thoughts about who they can be in their future, and how having hoped for and feared possible selves, so hope for the ones that you just aspire to become what you actually want, the desirable selves in your future, and also the undesirable selves, the things that you don't want to happen, which are the feared possible selves, that having those together can actually be motivating because it can motivate you away from what you don't want and towards what you do want. And I do think that there's a visualization aspect of this. It's funny that when I think about when we're talking about manifestation on a personal level, I think about a lot of times I am in many ways enacting my life in the future. I'm like often trying on deciding about like, does this fit for me? You know what I mean? Like how would this feel if I were to be here or to do that? And I think there might be a visualization aspect of that.
Yeah. Well, even like your possible selves is standing out to me because I'm sure you maybe see this too in the work you do, but I see this all the time with clients, but more so they're tapped more into that like feared self, right? And this might resonate with some of you listening because have you ever thought to yourself of like, this is who I don't want to be like, right? With parents, that's the epitome of an example. We always discuss, I don't want to be like this parent, right? I don't want to be like my mom. I don't want to be like my dad. I hear that over and over in a lot of my sessions. And what do you think happens more times than not? They're exhibiting the same things as the parent. They keep saying like, I don't want to be like that, right? This feared possible self has consumed their thoughts because they so much are doing anything they can not to be like that. But they've spent so much time and energy thinking about those feared traits that they become that, right?
Yeah.
And so with what you're discussing, I do try to have them balance of like, what's the other possible version of self look like? Like, how in ways are you actually not like that individual? Like, what would it feel like and look like to tap more into that self, right?
Yeah.
So it is that balance of two. But more times than not, we're so consumed with that feared self that I'm doing everything I can to not be that version. And that's energy, that attraction now to those thoughts. We end up becoming a lot of those traits.
Yeah. I think a lot of it also has to do with like modeling. Like our brains are pretty like cyclical and they're wired to kind of do what they do. So whatever you see tends to be like something that you replicate. I see this so much with my young son and I didn't quite like I understood it, but I understand it differently, like watching someone literally mimic everything I do. Like we walk up the stairs and I put my hand on the rail, then he'll put his hand on the rail. We'll take pictures and I'm squatting to be next to him, but he doesn't understand that that's why I'm doing it. So he squats too. It's cute. Really trippy. Like, and so I think like just the idea of modeling or like what you see being something that you ultimately do. And so I wonder if a piece of that is like that they're doing what they see and that the opposite end of that becomes being able to visualize what you actually do want if the model was what you don't want.
Yeah, no, definitely. I like that. A lot of science and psychology I know we're throwing at you. One more quick thing and then we'll move on to, how this ties into our authenticity. But I just want to shed light on kind of what the research and what psychology says that manifestation is not. Just to shed light on like, yes, if some of you do have doubts of like, I don't quite know if that works, like that's probably valid because, a lot of the evidence does suggest that just thoughts alone, which we've discussed this, thoughts alone, they cannot really influence a lot of like external things without action, right? Now, if you're someone who's able to operate just off thoughts and that's making all your goals and dreams come true, that's great. That's probably rare though, right? Like a lot of the evidence does show that like thoughts alone is not enough. We need the action. And this kind of ties back to Jim Carrey's quote of like, I can't just think it and then go eat a sandwich. Really what he was saying is like, we don't just think things and think, okay, because I thought it, it's going to come true, right? Even if we think it every single day, hopefully there's some action that follows every single day too. Okay? But what does help is the psychological and behavioral changes that results from, once again, a strong belief in one's goals can create conditions that make achieving those goals more likely. Okay? Going back to some of those key terms that we were discussing, that belief in self, right? So in essence, I think I like that, what the research says about manifestation. And I mean, it kind of aligns with my own thoughts, right? I mean, we are in the field, so maybe that's why. But I'm like, yes, like that's what I feel, right? Like thoughts alone, no. But reading affirmations each day, not so much. Extremely helpful though, right? Extremely helpful for other elements. But we're just talking about manifesting a life that you want, right?
Yeah.
Just reading some affirmations on social media, it's going to set the tone for you for sure, right? You're starting to change some of those thoughts. But going back to that triangle, now you need your feelings to start matching it, that belief, and now you need your behaviors to follow suit too.
Yeah, and I want to highlight this, it creates conditions. It's the conditions that you're in, and I think part of creating it is you creating those conditions.
Yeah.
And also being open to the conditions that would make that more likely to happen. Yeah. Because if you're not in the right condition, if you're not in the right place or around the right people, then it probably makes it really hard for you to manifest what you want.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks for tapping in to All Things Authentic. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. For full episodes, find All Things Authentic on your favorite podcast listening platform.